Joe, Ole Miss and South Carolina face off this week. Something that we've talked about a lot this week, unfortunately for Rebel fans, is that Ole Miss is coming off a very tough loss against Kentucky. South Carolina, on the other hand, look, Joe, I think some people thought that they've kind of gotten out to a better start than maybe some were anticipating. Getting in the battle with LSU, beating down on Kentucky, who really beat down on Kentucky, who Ole Miss just looked at. When you look at Ole Miss versus South Carolina, how do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, Blake, there's definitely been a lot of flashes for the South Carolina team, especially on defense, the way that we've seen a number of young players for them step up and really shine. Dylan Stewart is the one that everybody's been talking about for that defensive line. My first main thing, Blake, and I've got a couple other points that we're going to get to throughout this conversation, but my big main thing, this is just a pure, simple reason why I'm leaning Ole Miss right now. I think back to last year, and I think back to when Ole Miss lost to Alabama. And they didn't play great. They played really bad. I'm not comparing Kentucky to Alabama, but they played a bad game, arguably the worst game of their season last year. And they came back. Everybody was counting them out against LSU. And they put up a ton of points, 55 points, had the biggest game that they had all season long on the road. No, sorry, that was it. It was at home at Ole Miss, and they pulled out that victory. I say this to point out that I feel like as much as I was hard on Lane Kiffin after the game that they had against Kentucky, he typically is the type of coach that is going to show up, bounce back, and be super focused and locked in for the upcoming game. I would be really shocked if we see bad back-to-back performances for this Ole Miss program, why I'm leaning them slightly to win this game.
So just to talk about the point that you made, this South Carolina defense is not as bad as that LSU defense was a year ago.
Right.
And, Joe, I agree, even though there are points in a lot of things that you just said that I agree with, I don't know if Ole Miss's offensive line is played up to the caliber of that they need to play up to. So, with that being said, brother, I'm going to continue to say this. I don't know if South Carolina has enough to beat Ole Miss. However, that front seven is really good, man. I mean, like you're talking about them going up against two tackles in Emory Jones and Will Campbell a couple of weeks ago and absolutely giving that offensive line, who, Joe, let's call it what it is, with DJ Chester, who's now come into the mix here, three guys that are bona fide NFL dudes along that LSU offensive line, and they gave them issues all day long. It wasn't until later in the game that LSU got to be able to run the football. I think that that's going to keep them in the game. I need to see this Ole Miss offensive line that's got more new pieces into it against this defensive line because, Joe, last week, I'm not saying that Kentucky, as an example, doesn't have – I think Kentucky's defensive line is better overall than South Carolina's. But, Joe, and I don't want to use transitive property here, but what do we make of South Carolina beating the dog snot out of Kentucky?
I think that evidence is – well, we have enough evidence for South Carolina compared to other teams where they've played multiple SEC opponents that we can pull from. And I agree with what you're bringing up here with the offensive line. My main opening statement was just like from a preparation perspective, how they're going to step in this. Yeah. But I want to build on what you just said there with the offensive line because that conversation point applies to both teams. Ole Miss's offensive line got completely worked by Kentucky's defensive line. Deion Walker completely kicked the asses of that Ole Miss group. They're having some serious issues. But if we pull back and we look at how these teams are doing right now, South Carolina statistically is one of the worst offensive lines in the country. They are 130th in sacks allowed with 16 so far this year, and they're 133rd in TFLs allowed, and they're averaging allowing 9 per game. So they are getting really, really pushed around up front. They are a team that's kind of living and dying by turnovers, and they're living and dying by big splash plays in the run game that is helping them get touchdowns and long plays to put them in scoring position.
I don't think that that's all on the offensive line, Joe, if I'm being honest. I think that's a little bit more on Sellers and Ashford. Like the sacks that Kentucky, like the things that Kentucky did, the things that LSU did, Joe, they're holding the ball back there, and then Christmas was around the corner. I mean,
okay, but I think it's fair to admit that it's a combination of both things. I think the offensive line's playing
all on them because
okay.
they're running the football at the dominating rate that they are. Like legitimately, they are.
Well, their yards per carry average that they were having, I know that you don't like to do this, if you take away the big long runs that they had in some of those games, they're not really. Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
No,
because
I can. You know why?
Because an undisciplined defense like LSU's that's making mistakes that gives up those big gains compared to
Ole
an Ole Miss
defense.
Have
undisciplined defense. They showed you
Ole Miss didn't play bad defensively against Kentucky. Think
about what you just said. Think about this. Kentucky didn't have a touchdown against 2 Power 4 opponents. Not one. Both instances that Ole Miss gave up touchdowns were mental mistakes. Do you not dare tell me that they're not making mental mistakes.
This Ole Miss defense, they're the number 1 rush defense in the country. I know that they haven't played anybody. I understand that, but that context is still required to be talked about. They only allowed 93 rush yards to Kentucky. That's a great game.
You can't use those stats and then hurt the stats.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
No, you can't.
It's their secondary that played poorly in this game.
No, it was not, Joe.
Yes, it was.
How many yards did Sumo have? Go ahead.
47.
And how many attempts?
11.
Okay, so right around the 4 to 5 inkling, was it not? How many did Vandegrift have?
17.
And how many did the other kid have? How many did they have total? Don't tell me that they didn't have mistakes.
Blake, I watched the same game that you did. The problems that they had is their secondary played like shit. Their offensive line played like shit.
Tell me that a team like South Carolina, who doesn't allow a touchdown, Kentucky just can walk into Oxford and get 2 of them. And there's no mistakes that are being.
Wait, hold on. Not what I said.
Exactly what you're coming off and
saying. No, that's not at all what I'm coming off and saying here. All I am just trying to paint this picture is that Ole Miss is the best defense that potentially that they've gone up against.
I think that's to be determined, Joe. I don't think you have enough evidence on Ole Miss, because here's the other thing. Ole Miss had Kentucky with wide receivers that were getting separation on them, and they could barely complete a pass the 2 weeks beforehand.
That's what I'm talking about, their secondary being the bigger issue. That's why I'm making that point.
A lot more than just that. You can't tell me that Lenore Sellers and Rocket Sanders are Lenore Sellers and Rocket Sanders. I can't say their names back to back like that. It confuses the shit out of me. You get what I'm saying, Joe? They're going to walk into a hostile environment with their backs up against the wall. Now, I'm with you on that. I would lean them. I'm just really scared and tentative because last week I watched them get punched in the face and they didn't know how to respond. You know who else I saw got punched in the face? Literally Jackson Dart, and he didn't know how to respond. Joe, I've had multiple games with Jackson Dart, like Ole Miss a year ago, last week, where he starts getting hit and decision-making starts getting porous. And that's going to happen this week. That defensive front has shown us. Joe, am I lying?
No, I'm not lying. I didn't say that you were lying.
So the God's honest truth is that what Jackson Dart's going to show up. And then here's another thing. Speaking of run games, Joe, I don't think that their running game has been good, meaning Ole Miss, even in the bad opponents that they've played. Who is the guy that they can go to, line up and run the football? Because when they've played teams with somewhat of a relative pulse, they have not looked good to me. I had Brad Logan on today. He covers Ole Miss for Believe. The one thing that he said was, in the interview that I had with him, Blake, that I don't know if we can run the football. And I agree with him.
No, I mean, they're not having issues running the ball up until Kentucky. You know, they were averaging over 200 and something a game, and they were playing nobody. Again, to reiterate, they were playing against nobody. It has everything to do with the offensive line and the lack of performance and success that they have with their offensive line. I think that, and when we brought this up in my reaction to the Kentucky game, it did not feel like Lane Kiffin took preparation for the Kentucky game seriously. And I called into question. I called into question his ability to meet expectations. I think that, again, he's very Marcus Freeman-esque. Whenever I see a coach that does this, where they lay an egg Any coach that does this where they completely just have an underwhelming, no energy performance when they are successful and they've been successful and they have a lot of wins, they usually come out and try and find ways to correct some of those issues. But I agree with a lot of what you're saying here. Jackson Dart is probably going to be pressured a ton. He's going to see a lot in his face. I think that Jackson Dart is the best quarterback that the South Carolina defense has faced up until this point, and that is going to be something that is going to stress them potentially. But he can't turn the ball over. He can't make mistakes. He can't take sacks. They're going to be all over his ass because we saw that the South Carolina defense do this already against every single opponent that they've gone up against. So there is an opportunity here for South Carolina to get this upset. There is a legitimate chance. I am not calling into question that they can't get this upset and win this football game. But I would expect that Lane Kiffin, with his reputation on the line, a potential new job on the line, getting to the playoff on the line, all of those things on the line, knowing he needs to win this game and hearing him talk about it leading into it, he is going to expend every possible opportunity to pull out this game.
He's also still out there trolling. Like he's got an opponent in 2 weeks in LSU.
What did he say?
He came out and said that, well, they're a penalty away from being undefeated. Thank you for telling me that you Jamarcus Russell and you didn't watch the film, okay? But, Joe, here's my concern. Okay, my concern for South Carolina is can they score enough if Lane does what we think he can do. Now, I agree with you on what you just said. Lane always has these turnaround games where he comes back and he starts slinging it all over the place. But I start questioning, do you have anybody? I know that they do. I'm being hyperbolic here. Do you have anybody outside of Trey Harris that can catch passes?
Well, you would think that Juice Wells would have a big game going against his former team. It's a good question. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts. Is he hurt? I mean, I feel like he hasn't really.
He was in the game. I mean, he was in the game last week. We got him dressed out. I used it as my cover photo today on AYS SEC. No, I mean, he just didn't get targeted.
Yeah, no, he
played. Well, and
hasn't done much this year, though.
Here's another thing. Lane trolled that injury report. Did you see the injury report he put out last week? He trolled it. He put like 70 guys on that son of a gun and made it a mockery. And then he walked in there and got his ass beat. Joe, I'm worried about this team's toughness. Are they tough enough to go into South Carolina? I can't believe I'm saying this. Are they tough enough to go into South Carolina and win? Joe, that place is going to be rocking. And here's another thing too, man. South Carolina's backs up against the wall too. They want to go back out there and vindicate what happened to them against LSU. They feel like they had a game stolen from them. And they're going to want to come out there and prove a point too. And I'm going to tell you, man, I know their defense is much better. I love Pete Golding, have known Pete for a long time. Really. I mean, over 2 decades now, I've known Pete. He's a stone's throw away from where he grew up, from where I'm at the current moment. But the bottom line comes to, South Carolina is a tough physical football team. Joe, they're going to line up and they're going to run the football right at you. And you go, hey, man, if we get 4 yards, we don't care. And another thing, Jude, they're going to make a special teams play. This team, listen, I'm a die on my sword on this one. The team that I saw on film the first couple of games of the season and then watching LSU again and then watching what they did against Akron, Joe, this team is better than anybody wants to give them credit for. And I understand BetOnline has them at an 8.5, 9-point spread. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to take the spread, but Ole Miss to win, because I cannot visibly see at the current moment that South Carolina doesn't get some push on them, man. I don't know how tough Ole Miss is. So for that reason, I'm going to go. I would go with South Carolina with the points. I think, man, I'm going to lie. I'm not going to lie. I think I'm going to buy a point when I put that one in and give myself 9.5 just to.
It's not a bad idea.
Just to be safe. But go over to BetOnline and figure that one out. All right.